You are listening to Talking Images, the official podcast of icmforum.com. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Chris, and in this episode, we're talking about film reviews in the too long didn't read generation. Because is this actually a way to talk about cinema in 2024, or have everyone involved in some kind of constructive film criticism just lost the plot? Because we should all probably just have switched to memes years ago. That's what's happening on social media. That's what's happening everywhere you look. Is there actually any kind of market for reading reviews? Yes, Twitter has moved on from 140 characters and allow you to write up to 4,000 characters now, but has the world joined them? Do people still read any kind of in-depth commentary? And more importantly, do my co-host, what film magazines are we subscribed to, if any? What film critics do we follow, if any? And are any of us silly enough to write extensive film reviews ourselves? I know Saul actually writes a mini review of every film he sees, and he catches thousands a year. And we're also lucky enough to have Niels, the mind behind underhand.com here. We'll get a decent bit of debate for sure, but I do have to keep the intro short here for the, shall we say, too long didn't listen members of the audience. So let me just bring Saul in right away, as you have a bit of a vested interest in this topic, and then I'll open it up. What is even the purpose of writing film reviews in today's too long didn't read generation?
Hi, Chris. Hi, everyone. I think the purpose of film reviews really is a personal log or personal memory log. I suppose that's the main reason why I write them. I mean, it is great if somebody else reads my review and comments on it, but for me, it's sort of just capturing my feelings at any particular point. Because I love discussing films, and yet with the 1,200 films on average that I watch a year, if I've watched the film a couple of years ago, I might not remember the specifics of it. However, if I've written a review, I've got a few things to jog my memory, which means I can launch into discussion at any time. So for me, I guess it's the social aspect of it, having that log in there so that if films come up in discussion, I can go, oh, this is what I thought of it there, or I can jog my memory, and then I might remember things to talk about. So for me, it's sort of writing it for myself rather than for the readers out there. And yes, I know we'll get into that later.
And what about you, Niels? Because underhand.com is like at least a semi-professional website where you interview famous directors, etc., and you have covered quite a few films. Are you satisfied if no one reads them and it's just your personal log?
Well, I actually agree with Saul. So I started out writing reviews for myself for pretty much the exact same reason. It kind of helps you to order your thoughts about a film, to put them down. And once they are on paper or on digital paper in this case, you can kind of let them go and have them as a reference later on. Of course, it's nice if people read it, but it's not the primary goal. And I think doing it for so long, it's almost been 20 years now, you can't keep doing it just to please others. It has to be something that you have to like yourself. So it's something I've always liked to do, to write, but I'm not a very creative person that again do writing from a blank slate. So film reviews is actually something that ties in with my other hobbies. I mean, it's kind of fun to do. And then, yeah, the director interviews, they're kind of a perk because they allow me to talk to the directors of which the films I love. It's something on the side. It's not something that I want to do professionally, but it's nice to hear that it at least looks semi-professional. So thank you for that.
That could have been a slight, but took it as a compliment, so I'm very happy to hear that. And our final panelist today is our very own Tom. Do you review every single film you watch? And what do you think is the purpose of film reviews in 2024?
I wish I reviewed every film I watched, like our other co-hosts, but I really struggle to find the motivation and the time to put together a little review on every film. I'd always much rather be watching more films than spending time writing about them. Having said that, I did used to write reviews for a number of online publications and enjoyed that. I'd get screener discs in the posts and go out to previews at the cinema, etc. But then as I got older and real life took older, that kind of took a back seat. But I do agree that it is so good to look back on past reviews and just reflect on the films and recall things that you may have forgotten about them. But I would say that the purpose of the reviews for me is probably 50-50, looking back as a kind of personal time capsule, but also on spreading the word on films. I find that reviews can be great for recommendations. If you've watched a film 5 or 6 years ago and you've written a review about it, or you're talking to the film about someone else, you can say, here's what I thought about it. So it is a mix for me, but either way, I do enjoy reviewing films. I just wish I had more time to do it. And how about you, Chris? Where do you stand on writing reviews of films?
Yeah, I'm pretty much in the same boat as you, Tom. I mean, I just don't generally have the time unless I feel truly inspired by the film, which just means that I either have a strong counter opinion that I want to express, or I just absolutely love it and I feel like something interesting I really want to dive into and hopefully discuss with others. I'll push out the review. Though writing just for myself, thinking that no one will read it, that's not that interesting to me. I wish I had the time because, like Saul and Neil said, it's really nice to have that memory jog, and especially because obviously we're doing talking images and we do film criticism here, not on paper but by spoken word. And generally, if we do larger episodes, I have to go back and rewatch these films, even if I saw them just 2-3 years ago, because I didn't write that personal review and I have to re-experience it to actually have something to say about it. So that's pretty frustrating. But even after this is our 5th season, and I haven't managed to find the time to write reviews on all the, even most of the films I see so far, because there's just not enough time for me. And I think that also ties in with the fact that when I want to write something, I don't just want to write 10, 20, 30 words. I want to go into a bit more detail as well. I feel a bit more compelled to do that. And I think with Saul Letterboxd, for instance, he's able to, in a very good way, just do it in around 200 words, which is very impressive. I mean, Saul is writing in the chat here, Chris needs to watch less and write more, but I mean, Saul watches, what did he say, 1,200 films, and he writes reviews on all of them a year. I still don't have the time. Anyways, this was about, this question turned into a bit more about why we personally write reviews. You, Tom, you obviously wrote film reviews for professional publications. You, Niels, you have your semi-professional publication. So in terms of ourselves, and just like, yeah, it's nice to have a personal log, etc. But why do you think film criticism still exists? Why do you think, Cares to Cinema, Sight and Sound, etc. are still publishing? Is there still a market for film criticism today? And what do you think are driving these people to write about cinema the way they do?
I think there is a market still for film criticism, but it's a very small part of the demographic. If you look at the number of people on Letterboxd, if you factor in how small percentage of them write reviews and how small percentage of that write proper reviews, it's a very small amount. But the small amount is probably significant enough that there can still be publications out there and still viable to keep going on. I don't know how much viable into the future it will be, but at this stage I'd say it's definitely viable. There are people who still read reviews, but they're a very small part of the population. I think the people who read like proper reviews, yeah, it's very, very small, but obviously it's enough that reviews still exist out there.
I think that there is kind of a niche for reading reviews, but like Saul said, it's getting smaller and smaller. On the other hand, sites like Rotten Tomatoes, they do aggregations of reviews. So I think people look more at that, but then to have these aggregations, you have to have these reviews in the first place. So even though people may not be reading all the texts, they are looking at what certain people or publications think of a film, and they're still using that as a kind of recommendation engine for themselves.
I would agree that there's definitely still a market for film reviews, although I have actually, in the past few years, cancelled a couple of subscriptions to magazines because I no longer read them as fully as I used to. But a lot of reviews are available online. Visit a number of publications to check out reviews online. And you mentioned what is driving people to write these reviews, Chris. And I think for me, the drive is the passion. I absolutely love sharing the word about brilliant films that I discover. And sometimes watching a great film can inspire me to pick up a pen or go to my keyboard and type out my feelings on why I love a film so much and try and spread the word of that online. So there are obviously people who do it for a job that I am kind of envious of, but I don't know if that would take some of the joy out of the writing, where it's just something that you've got to do every day and something against something that, you know, you're inspired to do.
Yeah, I've done some for film criticism as well, and I think that they're kind of like a nightmare too, isn't it? That not say a sight and sound journalist, but like for a regular publication where you literally just have to sit at the cinema and review every single film that comes out at the big screen, and you're pretty much just stuck with mediocre blockbusters throughout the year, and that's all you have to write about. I'm not sure if that would have been as enjoyable because you can't even pick the films you're choosing then. You Tom, you mentioned that you have cancelled some subscriptions. So I'm going to start with you for my next question about whether or not we actually still read reviews ourselves, be it from critics, Letterboxd, or the forum. Or are you still subscribed to any film publications at the moment?
I'm not. I'm no longer subscribed to any film publications.
Oh, well, none.
But I do read a lot of reviews when I watch a film that really sparks the imagination that I enjoy. Then, you know, I'll search online and find reviews from publications that I admire, or go on IMDb and scroll through the critic reviews and see if there's any familiar names or any that I want to read more about. And it can also be good for films where I've not fully grasped or understood what's going on, some of the more obtuse ones, and it's good to read about different people's interpretations.
Oh, that's a good point, Tom. Like, I do the same thing actually. If there's a film I struggle with or I don't quite understand, I'll go online and I'll see what are other people saying about this. That can be really, really helpful. That's actually a question I'll bring up later. What about you, Saul? Do you subscribe to any film publications?
I don't subscribe to any film publications, but then again, I never did. Back in the old days, I guess around 15 or 20 years ago, there would be some online critics who I would read up from. These days, I don't really go for many online critics except for Richard Skeeb, who does this great genre review site, Mariah. So I'll sometimes read what he's written if it's a genre film, but otherwise I don't really read external reviews of films, and I only read it if I've seen the film. So if I've seen a film, I usually try and read at least a couple of reviews afterwards. If it's not too many, the people in my Letterboxd friends, I'll read their reviews and their comments before I write my own one, just to sort of get a balance of what I think about a film. Usually there's a few things I'm on the fence about, and it might help me make up my mind or not. Sometimes it does the reverse. It helps make up my mind in the other direction, depending on what's written. But I usually try and read up a little bit about a film afterwards before writing it. I would very rarely read a review before watching a film. I think the only cases I'd be doing that would be something where it's got an extremely low rating, but it still looks incredibly interesting. I might just skim through, but not properly read a couple of reviews, just to try and work out if it's something which I think I might like. But in general, yeah, I don't really read reviews, at least not until after I finish watching a film. And then Tom said about films where you're not quite sure about what they mean, or you're not quite sure about an interpretation of it. For those, I actually much prefer video essays. I know that might be like an awful thing to bring up in this podcast, but I guess it's the too long didn't read generation. I can actually find some really good YouTube videos, usually, which have explanations for films, like Denis Villeneuve's Enemy. There were some really great video reviews of that, which explained the ending of that, which I thought were quite satisfying, more so than written explanations.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I might come back to some of the things you were saying there later, so about whether or not we like to read reviews before or after we watch a film. But before then, what about you, Neil? Do you subscribe to any film publications?
I have never had a subscription to any film review publications or anything like that. I did follow a website back in the old days. It was called Twitch Film. They still exist as Screen Anarchy, but I kind of like to go into a film blank, so I definitely don't read them up front. Very rarely do I read reviews afterwards. Only when I'm watching a film and I know it's a very highly regarded film and I don't quite see anything special about it. So that's when I usually go to review sections like Letterboxd, or I kind of search on Google for bigger publications and read the reviews to see what sparks the film in people, what attracts them to it. So last example, I think, was Anatomy of a Fall. It was a film, it wasn't too bad, but I didn't really see what made it special. And that's the case where I go into search mode and look for reviews and see what other people are saying.
So I guess I'm the only person who still has a film magazine subscription then. Wow, I didn't expect that. So I still subscribe to Sight and Sound. So I'm getting the online version because I don't have place for all of the physical magazines at the moment. That's definitely enjoyable. I get to catch up on their reviews and also their features. It's a pretty good magazine, though they are not fully aligned with my personal taste. I still get recommendations from them. And I guess I have to follow up on what you were saying then earlier. So because I'm a bit different from you. Like if I see a film, I'm not going to be as likely to read a review of it unless it was something I'm really passionate about and I want to see what other people's opinions are. I'm usually more interested in finding out if a film is worth seeing. And Sight and Sound, for instance, they are great because, yes, they have some really long reviews that can go on for multiple pages. But they also have these mini reviews, which will be pretty much like Letterboxd reviews or your Letterboxd reviews, which will be like 100 words or 200-300 words. And it's really quick to get a sense of the film. And that way I'll essentially make a little mental note or go to my watch list or, change my yearly watch list because of that. And that's very handy. And with the online version, I also get access to the old magazines. When I have time, I'll go back and read them and catch up on some films that might have been more popular on release, say, 60 years ago than they are now, and find recommendations that way. But yeah, no, I've never been that into reading reviews from critics of a film after I've seen it. I know you, Saul, and you, Niels, answered this a little bit already. What about you, Tom? Do you prefer reading reviews before or after you see a film?
I'm with Sol and Niels. I only ever read reviews after watching a film because I'm such a spoiler phobe. Any little glimmers of information or big glimmers of information that can be given away in a review can really impact my views on watching the film. I like going into films blind, so I don't want to know anything. I will just maybe glance at a star rating or a percentage on certain websites to give me an idea. And then once I've seen the film, I will, if I'm writing a review, I tend to do that before reading any reviews so that the thoughts are just mine. If I'm not writing a review, I'll just go straight into the reviews and then see what people think after I've seen the film.
So that's interesting. Yeah, so we're all three of you, I guess, not me, are complete spoiler folks and just don't like knowing things about the films ahead of time. I mean, that must be a film critic's worst nightmare because their original purpose in life was essentially hi, I'm gonna watch these films and I'm gonna tell you, I'm gonna write about them, I'm gonna tell you kind of, should you see it, should you not, and these are the kind of people who might like it. That's kind of like the essence of what traditional film criticism was all about. And the three of you are kind of like, no, that purpose isn't that interesting to me.
I'll just second also what Tom said about star ratings, because you did mention, Chris, that you like reading reviews to see whether a film is worthwhile or not. For me, that's what the star rating's for. it's in order for me to sort of say, okay, well, look, Tom gave that 4 stars. He rarely gives out 4 stars. I'm going to watch that and then I'll read his review afterwards. So for me, it's sort of that indication. Or, Niels gave this film 1 star. He gives tons of films 1 star, but it looks sort of interesting, so maybe I'll watch it, maybe I won't watch it. So for me, the star rating gives the indication, but the actual contents of the review, I won't read that until afterwards.
I love how it sounds kind of counterproductive in that we all write a lot of reviews but refuse to read reviews until after we've seen the film. But I think that perspective kind of colours my style of reviewing as well, actually, because I always try and limit myself and write reviews as if I was the person going to be reading them. So I try and keep the plot descriptions to a minimum and try and focus more on how the film made me feel, the performances, etc., rather than things that are going to potentially spoil the review. So it's a good thing that I bear in mind when I'm writing a review to make sure that I'm not giving away too much of a film for the reader.
I also think maybe that because we are watching so many films, it becomes slightly less interesting to see if it's kind of worth to see a film, because there are always going to be films we don't like in the end. And if you like Saul or me, Saul is 1,200 films a year. I think I'm at 700 now. There's always going to be filler, and there's always going to be films that you want to see just for other reasons than actually being a big fan of them. So that purpose of reading reviews and filtering out films you definitely won't be liking, I think kind of disappears in that sense.
I'm just going to jump in on the plot description question because this was something really interesting in my early days of writing reviews on IMDb, back when that was a viable thing. So this is going back, 15 to 18 years ago, quite a long time ago. I would usually do a few lines of plot summary before I went actually into discussing the film. And I got told off by people. I mean, people in the IMDb message board days were quite opinionated and everything. But I was told, I'm not interested in hearing a plot summary. I'll read a plot summary if I wanted. All I want to hear is what you think of it. And that sort of stuck with me. And when I write reviews, I usually start off with a 1-sentence plot description. If I really, really need to, it might bleed into a second or third sentence, but I usually keep it to 1 sentence. And I only bring up plot elements as they come up, as they're relevant to what I'm talking about. Otherwise, I do try and keep the plot summary out of it because it does seem a bit redundant. There are so many places out there that offer plot summaries. Unless it's a misleading one, and there are unfortunately quite a few films out there with misleading plot summaries. Unless it is a misleading one, I usually won't get too much into the plot in my actual review, unless it actually pertains directly to something that I'm commenting on.
That's really good advice to people wanting to write reviews as well, and that's also really good advice for people who want to write for people like Tom. I mean, if they actually read reviews before they watched the film, because one of the things that frustrates me the most about a lot of film criticism, and then to me it feels lazy, is just like half the review, for instance, will be extensive just descriptions of the plot, and in those cases I just feel like the critic just didn't have anything original to say. They just needed to fill out however many words they have been given by the publication, and it's just a waste of time. I noticed that a lot when I used to be reading Norwegian newspapers, for instance. It's just dull, and often they spoil things too. I mean, this is actually an issue I have with some Sight and Sound reviews, where even in like a 200-word review, they'll suddenly just drop in some hint about where the film is going, and I'll be really annoyed. I think that what a film review should do, in my opinion, is to give you an idea of how it feels, how you're going to experience it. So I think that if you can summarize, okay, how did this film make you feel? Why does it make you feel that way? How did you react? And what kind of things did it make you think? I think that's much more interesting to really get a sense of, because you kind of learn about the experience of the film rather than the plot. I also think that opens us up for, on the forum, for instance, or us here in film discussion, like you kind of get a sense of just learning about other people too. And I think that's one of the more interesting things about discussing films, is learning why other people like certain films. And that's when things get interesting. If it's just a general summary, it's usually just dull and a time waster for me.
That's a great point, Chris. And I think some other advice is just being a bit considerate with the words that you use as a reviewer. Say there's a film where someone dies within the first 20 minutes. It might be in the plot description, but I don't want to know that. Rather than saying after her father dies, you can just say after a tragic turn of events or something like that. And maybe if a film is a slow burn and then towards the last 15 to 20 minutes, there's some hallucinatory, nightmarish scenes that really bring it to life. You don't have to say exactly what happens at that point. You can just say stick with the film because it gets really wild towards the end or something like that. So it's so easy to describe a film without going into details. And I wish that that's something that people would do more, because then I would probably be more interested in reading reviews prior to watching a film.
It's kind of funny because I've never been a part of the IMDb community, but when I started out writing, people actually told or asked me to add short plot summaries. I do it. I've kept doing it from back then, but I like Tom said, I try to keep away from spoilers. I kind of keep to the premise of the film. So what's it about? It's not about the theme, so it's a bit more specific than the themes. But I do include a short summary of the plot. And it's part of my structure of reviewing films. So I've been doing it since the early days, and I kept doing it. It's not for me because I don't really care about the plot either. I mean, it's something you figure out while watching. So it's not that interesting to me, but I include it for other people's, I guess.
I think it is worth pointing out, Niels, that most of the stuff that you're reviewing is actually much more obscure than the stuff that Tom and myself would be reviewing, or Chris when he finally has time to sit down and do a review.
So, come on. Go on the forum who was like, this guy is gonna sit down and write like these random essays on Yugoslavian art films from the 1960s with XYZ lens or something like that. He was really annoyed by the obscure films I was bringing up.
Okay, well, I'm just saying in general, because Niels watches a similar amount of films to me a year. He's probably in the 1,000 film club a year. So he watches a similar amount to me, but he watches a lot of obscure and weird and out there films. I do, but probably only about half the films I watch are weird, obscure, and out there. Half of them are pretty mainstream. So I think because he watches so much obscure stuff, I think it sort of makes sense that people are yearning for that plot summary, because that information might not be readily available otherwise.
Oh, that's a good point. I think it's also worth thinking about the format here a little bit. Too. I think that if you're writing, and I think it actually makes sense why people writing for more traditional publications, for instance, do include plot summary to a point, even though it's boring to a lot of people like myself, because for a lot of people who will be reading those are people who aren't following cinema, and they might care more about plot, and they haven't necessarily, even in a pretty mainstream film, they won't have read about it before or heard much about it. So I think that in those cases it kind of makes sense, and with Niels' website also being more of a long form reviews, it also makes a bit more sense. I think that the longer your reviews are, as a rule, it makes sense to go into a bit more detail about that stuff too. I mean, you can see these publications write about, extended information about the actors who are a part of it, the director, as some history as well. And if you have space for that, and that's part of what you're doing, and you're kind of teaching people at the same time, like this is kind of what you expect, this is what these people have done before, then it makes sense, even if for us, we either know this information already or are writing them ourselves in 200 words, it will be relevant. But if you're doing that 3,000 4-page review for Sight and Sound, it makes sense, I guess. And I think it also ties in with different target groups for different reviews.
I think Chris has a good point there. It's usually about different target groups that you're talking about, because some people will be very interested in the actors who are in the film. Others care more about the experience of a film, the cinematography and the visuals. Some people just go in for the plots and want to know if there are twists and turns and if it's exciting. So if you have a long form review, you can put all those in and people get out of it what they want. I myself keep to a very strict structure of, so if you want to plot, it's always the fourth paragraph. You can just skip it if you don't want it. But what I do is I try to keep it separated in paragraphs. So you kind of know if you don't want to read the plot, you can just skip one paragraph. Other reviews like Sound and Sound, like you said, they kind of weave it into the entire review, and then it becomes a bit more difficult to pick the parts that you actually are interested in when reading a review.
Yeah, that's a good point, the skimmability. And that might actually be a solution for too long didn't read generation too, which is that this might be too long, but here's the bits and pieces you might want to read. Should all reviews essentially be tweaked for this skimming generation so they can stop and read exactly what they want to learn about? And if not, what are the best ways to kind of just express what we want to express in 2024?
I'm a pretty structured person myself, so it kind of grew organically, I guess. But my reviews, the long form ones, they are extremely structured. It's always an introduction, then a bit about the director or franchise, a bit about the themes, then it is the plot, the cinematography, the score, the actors, then a little bit about the structure of the entire film, and then the conclusion. So it's always 9 paragraphs. It's always divided in the same kind of length and structure of the review, and you can easily skip them to the parts that you are interested in. But that's just me. That's because I'm a very structured person, and because I like this structure and to have this kind of not start from a blank page every time. But I don't think most reviews are like that.
When I'm writing my reviews, I like to try and make sure that the review flows. So that'll probably be my number one thing, rather than having different things in different areas. I mean, it is really great. There are some Letterboxd reviewers who do things in a very structured way. There's a Letterboxd reviewer called Luke Thorne who has a couple of paragraphs of plot that'll talk about the directing, will talk about the acting, will break down to individual elements. There are some reviewers also who will do a plot summary, then do positives and negatives. That's actually kind of interesting. I think that does work well for the too long didn't read generation, just having a list of negatives, a list of positives. I actually kind of like that also because it's easier to sift through information, even though it doesn't flow as well as a couple of well-written paragraphs would do. It allows you to see really quickly at a glance what the most important things are. What I've also seen a few other reviewers do is highlight certain parts of a review in bold. It's a bit weird because at first you expect they're highlighting directors' names or names of films, but it's just phrases that they want to stick out, which I think is kind of an interesting way to do it. I don't really have a solution for it myself because I like my reviews to flow as much as possible, so it sounds like what I would say to somebody out loud if I was speaking to them out loud, rather than having a structure. I'm going to say this, this, and that. And there's some things that I don't talk about in a review. It just depends whether it's relevant to the film or not. I won't always talk about performances. I won't always talk about cinematography. I won't always talk about music score. It all depends on the actual film itself and whether those things stand out and whether they're worth commenting on. Otherwise, I might just talk about themes and issues and the way that the film works and the emotions that it drives me. I guess I find when people talk about things as being anxiety-inducing or paranoid-ridden, those are the things that really attract me towards a film. So when a film really fills me with dread, I try and communicate that across rather than try to have a structured thing. I'm going to talk about this, 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 and this. But I know for some people that works better. And I also know that when I read reviews, if things are structured, it is a bit easier for me. But in terms of writing, I just like writing in a way that flows better, more like a conversation or a versation, I guess, because you're not really conversing with anybody. But I just like it to sort of flow as the way I'll talk to somebody.
I share Sol's point of view on this. While I do appreciate Niels' reviews and how they are structured, it can be great to just quickly look at certain aspects of a film and what the writer thinks. From the perspective of a writer, I see writing a review as an artistic or creative outlet. So I also like it to flow. And if I'm doing a long form review, I won't necessarily comment on every aspect of the film, but I'll highlight the bits that speak to me, the strong elements and the themes that are worth mentioning. So I may sometimes write a review about a film and not hone in on the performances, or maybe just don't mention the soundtrack if they aren't parts that I really feel are necessary for the review. But usually I will focus on most of the main points at certain parts during the review. One thing that I think is worth mentioning as well, one of the reasons why I don't write reviews for every film I watch, is that I find it really difficult to write reviews for bad films. And I think now, going over it in my mind, that is one of the things that stopped me doing reviews for publications, because I get sent discs to review and the films, they're not that good, and it'd just feel to me like a waste of effort trying to write a review about why a film isn't good. It's only the films that I think are good that I find it easy to find the time to write a review and comment on. So yeah, any films that are bad or mediocre, it can be a real struggle.
That's very interesting to hear, Tom, because I don't want to sound the complete opposite, but I'd say films that are really bad sort of invoke a passionate feeling in me. I find them the easiest to write for. If there's tons of things that I can complain about, or tons of things that are wrong or didn't work, I can usually write a review for that much easier. I'd say even easier than a film that really impresses me, because if a film really impresses and overwhelms me, it might take me a while to process why it works so well. Whereas if I absolutely hate a film, and I can name a ton of different reasons, I find that it flows quite easily. For me, it's the films that are mediocre, the films that are in between, the 5 out of 10 films. Those are the ones that I find the hardest to try and say something about. I'm a bit pedantic. I try and keep all my reviews about the same size. I'm a bit pedantic like that. So for me, if it's a mediocre film, if it's a 5 out of 10, or a weak 6 out of 10, or a strong 4 out of 10, those are usually the hardest to write about. But if it's a 4 out of 10 or below, 7 out of 10 or above, that's usually much easier for me to write.
I suppose for me as well, it's if a film's bad or just average, I really can't be bothered to spend any more time with that film. So finding the time to write about a film that I've not enjoyed kind of defeats the purpose of my passion for films. It's not something that really excites me whatsoever. It's much easier to just give a star rating and say it's rubbish than elaborate on why it's rubbish or boring.
Well, I actually think that if it's a film that's bad, or a popular film that you think is off, it's really interesting to just explore why it didn't work for me. So if it's a very well-respected film that didn't really work for me, I can kind of try to pinpoint the aspects that other people are loving but didn't have the same effect for me, and that can be a really fun conversation starter. But I don't really write that many reviews myself, so it's not something I actively do. But the times you do explore bad films, that can be really fun. I mean, I think our second ever episode actually was, and I can plug it now, even though it was our second episode and it's a bit more rougher in the editing, it was about how Klaus Kinski played Nosferatu twice and how bad the second one is. So we talk about the Nosferatu from 1979, then we talk about the sequel, A Vampire in Venice from 1988, which I gave 2 out of 10. It's so bad, and that was such a riot to talk through and do as a podcast. So I would be open to doing more podcast episodes about bad films as well. I think that it brings something out where we can just all have a really amusing time in just tearing a film apart and talk about how ridiculous certain aspects is. And I think that's a part of film culture. One of the reasons why it can actually still be valuable or interesting to watch a bad film. One is that you kind of get that benchmark to compare it with other films. Like, okay, something this bad actually exists. But the other one is that you can actually talk about it. And a big part of why we're cinephiles, I like talking with people about film, is that even a bad viewing or a mediocre viewing can bring a lot of positive things out in conversation afterwards.
Even in the language that we use, it's kind of easier to complain about things than express excitement. In the very beginning, I did write long-form reviews for films I didn't like. They were actually usually my most creative reviews, but they were kind of scathing and people didn't like them because, my taste is a little weird and I dislike films that a lot of other people like. So I kind of stopped doing that, but for me it was a lot easier to write about a bad film. I really get passionate about that because you just spent like 90 or 120 minutes looking at something that you actually didn't like, so you kind of want to write that feeling off of you. I do struggle more with writing about things I love, and that's why I kind of focused on that on my blog, because I just wanted to be more positive about film and not just be very negative and be known. I'm still known as a very negative guy, but I kind of wanted to counter that when I started writing about films.
I have just suggested that we need to do a worst film we've ever seen podcast at some stage. I've actually got really interested in that now. It might be interesting to go back and rewatch the film that I consider to be the worst of all time and see if it still stacks up as being that bad.
Oh God, I mean, I'm just getting flashes thinking about having to rewatch Man of the Hands of Fate or one of the other films I have at the bottom of my list there. It's a scary thought, but I would be up for it. But to get back on the topic then, because I think we pretty much talked through a lot of what we want in reviews ourselves and what we think critics should do. Being that we're almost at the end here, we might want to end on a positive note. So a lot of you have mentioned Letterboxd. Joel mentioned that he covers every film he sees on Letterboxd, and he also writes it a bit as a conversation, and that's in part because Letterboxd actually does allow people to start conversations with you. Like you write a review, and then you can get a ton of comments under, asking questions about the reviews, commenting, arguing, and you can just carry on an interesting conversation from there. And Letterboxd does have tons of reviews. It's so much activity there, and many of them get thousands and thousands and thousands of likes as well, even though some of them are literal memes in text. You will see these fun, like, one line, one word comments get voted up to the top, but at the same time you also get some pretty good in-depth reviews voted up to the top. So do you guys think that Letterboxd is actually revitalizing interest in film reviews, or do you think that the puns will win out in the end?
I think the puns will win out in the end, but it's the same with film publications. There are still film publications because there is some interest in there. There is still interest in people reading proper reviews. It's just an extreme minority. So any big or popular films are all going to have meme reviews as the main reviews, because the people who are the most popular in Letterboxd, who's got the most followers, the influencers, in inverted commas, those are the people who write reviews that are meme reviews, that are joke reviews, that are there for the too long didn't read generation. So those are always going to float towards the top. So I don't think there's any way of changing that. I think we're going to get more and more meme reviews as things progress, because people are going to realize that's the easiest way to get followers, is to say something witty or say something topical and get a few likes for it. So I think we are going to see more and more of that, but I think there is still an appetite for proper reviews out there.
I think in my case, most of the feedback I'm getting on my reviews is, where did you see the film? So I don't think there's, at least on my side, a lot of conversation on Letterboxd. There are a couple of people who follow me who kind of join in from time to time. But it's a broader problem that there aren't really that many places anymore where you can have a conversation online, because a lot of these social platforms aren't really that social in the way that you can actually talk to people beyond a few emoticons or a couple of words. So I think Letterboxd made a nice move there, also by allowing people to write in their main language. You have people writing in Spanish, in Chinese, Japanese. So you have these different communities that come together there, which is kind of fun. But I don't think it will spark a whole new wave of film criticism or people talking about film in depth.
The meme reviews and the one-liners really frustrate me, because you see them with hundreds, even thousands of likes sometimes, and then you've got a review that you've spent ages on that you're really proud of, and it gets like 1 or 2 likes, and it can be really disheartening. But I suppose people just want a quick fix, 1 or 2 lines from popular influencers on the website, and they're happy with that. But I do think that Letterboxd has a great purpose, and there are lots of incredibly talented writers out there who share reviews, and if you seek them out, you can find some great insights into films. So there is a lot of good stuff out there. It's just sifting through it and finding out a connection with some good people on the site.
Yeah, I agree with that. Now, my reviews tend to end up in the same scenario as you, Tom, especially because when I do feel inspired to write a review on Letterboxd, it's usually for a film I really liked and which didn't really have a lot of other reviews. And in many cases, those are just films that not a lot of people will watch. They will just sit there for a while. Maybe I'll get an extra bonus for that too if there are no other reviews and it's the only one there. But that's when I feel especially inspired to do it. I don't have that writer bug that Saul has. Sadly. But Saul did have one final question he wanted to ask because he's genuinely curious and I guess he wants to see how true this is. Do any of you guys like reviews on Letterboxd that you haven't actually read? Is this an issue or a thing that happens?
I've never really done that and I really don't see the point in it, but I guess some people like the fact that maybe you like a film they like and that's enough for them to like the review even when they didn't read it. Maybe something like that. I don't know.
I think it is a real issue. I notice it quite a bit, and I know there's no way of proving it, but you have somebody who follows you and then likes around 10 of your reviews with it all within the space of 30 seconds, and it's sort of like you feel they're doing it to get your attention and to make you want to follow them back rather than actually reading it. And there's also some people who are like serial likers, so they've actually maybe only logged a few thousand films on Letterboxd, but they've got 100,000 likes because every afternoon when they come home from work, whatever the case might be, they just go like. And I can go into that person's feed and I can see that they've liked 20 reviews from different people all within the space of 1 minute. And I guess that's sort of nice if they're trusting the people who've written them and they want to support what they've written. But for me, it's just very, very strange behavior that I don't quite understand. For me, I just use the like feature honestly. So if I like a review, it means that I've read it and I agree with the gist of it. If I don't agree with what a review is saying, I usually won't like it. Unless maybe I've had a conversation with the reviewer, maybe we've discussed a few things, I might go back and like it. But I try and only like things that I like, because for me that makes sense. I don't know. I guess maybe because I was never into Facebook, I never got into the whole like thing. But for me, it's just very strange. The only times that I'd like a review that I haven't read would be if it's very long. So if a review is longer than 3 paragraphs, and there are some out there, I'll sometimes just skim read through the rest of it. But I'll never like a review that I haven't at least skim read through. But most reviews aren't more than 3 paragraphs long, so usually if I've liked a review, it means that I've actually read it, and in most cases, it means that I agree with the gist of it. And I just find it really strange how many people there are out there that like reviews without reading them. And I sort of don't want to say that's a bad thing, because it's really nice in your Letterboxd feed when you get like so-and-so likes it, or when I've done a really good review and I've just got a whole lot of serial likes for it. It is a nice feeling to have all those likes there, but it's sort of, I don't know, it feels a bit false, doesn't quite feel genuine. So I don't want to stop people liking my reviews, but I just sort of wish that I had more of a sense I actually read them rather than just click the like button.
I rarely give out likes on Letterboxd. It's only if something really connects with me that I will. I use it sparingly. And I do agree with Sol that it can be a bit strange when people just give out so many likes, but in a way it can also be nice. And I suppose if you know that person, it can be just seen as a way of supporting your friends. But it is much more rewarding to know that someone has read your review, and maybe if a comment is left also to explain why they liked it or ask more questions or engage in a conversation. That's probably more exciting to receive and a like, because you get more engagement that way.
And with that slightly pandering moral grandstanding, I think you have one final question, Tom?
Yes, that's right, Chris. Quite an interesting question here, because I was wondering if people watch films differently when they know they are preparing a review of the film. It might not apply so much in this conversation, but for me, I know that when I'm writing a long form review, I will be thinking about that review at the same time as watching the film. And that's perhaps why I don't write reviews for every single film, because if I'm watching a bad or an average film, my mind might drift off. I could be thinking about how I'd write about that film whilst the film is on, taking my attention away from it, even though I am thinking about the film in a way. And I'm wondering if people have a different approach to watching films when they know they've got to write a review?
There's kind of two sides to that question. I haven't had to write a review for a film that I know I was going to write about from the start. So there have been a couple of cases where I've been commissioned a review. And then indeed you kind of pay more attention to certain parts of the film, and it's a bit harder to let it wash over you and like just experience the film. But in most cases when I'm writing for my blog, it kind of works the other way around. It's only when I really like a film that I will write a long-form review about it. Otherwise, it's just like a little capsule review. Liking the film dictates whether I will or will not write a long review about it. During or while watching a film, I'm not really aware of, am I going to review this or not? It's more at the end like, okay, I really like this, then yes, I will review it.
I'm really surprised, even shocked, that our film purist has said that his mind drifts off when he's watching films, because my instant thought was, Jesus, go back and rewind the part that you think you missed out on because your mind drifted off. Yeah, although I guess maybe that would be not film purism, because you shouldn't be rewinding a film as you're watching it. So I guess I get the kind of argument, but that was kind of interesting. Look, much like Niels, I guess because I review every film that I watch, I don't actively think about it while watching it. Sometimes a film will come up with a really cool quote, or there'll be something really cool that I'll want to talk about in my review. So sometimes, I know this is anti-film purism, but if I'm streaming it, I might pause the film and do a screenshot, or I might pause the film and sort of write down what the quote was. So every so often when I'm watching, I can't do it at the cinema. I can't do it at the cinema very well. It's a bit hard to do when you're on the cinema and you want to try and take a note. But if I'm watching a film at home and I'm streaming it, then yeah, by all means, I'll pause and I'll write something down, or I'll pause and take a screenshot. It doesn't really affect the experience of it that much. It actually makes it sort of more exciting for me because I know what I want to talk about. As I said earlier on, the hardest films to write about are the mediocre ones. So if it gets to the end of a film that I've streamed and I've taken no screenshots, I've written down no comments or made no comments or anything I want to talk about, that's me when I go like, I wonder what I'm going to say. But yeah, look, for me it doesn't really affect the film experience because it's just so much of my journey. You know, watching a film for me isn't just putting it on, playing it, and then stopping it. It's me putting on, playing it, stopping it, writing a review, checking it on iCheck Movies, logging it on Letterboxd, voting on it on IMDb. All of that for me is actually part of my film experience.
It is an interesting question, Tom. While I don't actively write like you guys, we do have a lot of episodes where we will talk about films in depth, and I do think that I will try to pay even more attention if I know that, okay, we are going to be, spending 20 minutes on this film in the upcoming episode. I don't take notes during the film, but I will probably start writing up my thoughts quickly afterwards and engage with it more than I otherwise would, be that just trying not to drift off if it's a film I'm not enjoying, because obviously if it's a dull film, your mind will often go to other things. I'll try to actively be looking for things that I can point out and bring up a conversation, and I'll probably also reflect on it, read some reviews, etc. afterwards as well. So I probably do put in a bit more energy if I know that, okay, this is a film we're going to be covering here on Talking Images. Oh, and I guess I can also end the episode with a plug that we now have a new film discussion subforum on the ICM forum, where we actually do manage to get some decent conversation around the new films, with them still being fresh in a lot of people's memories. And what we often do there is actually we have both a summary and like a mini review on top, and then people can just dive into anything they want to discuss about it. So that's been a very nice addition this last year that has brought on a lot of more film discussion than we previously had. So very happy that was added, and you should definitely go there and check it out. Maybe even add some new threads yourself, because we do try to be one of those places where you actually do have the opportunity to talk about films And we will also have, of course, a thread up for this episode of Talking Images, where you can tell us, if you still read reviews, which publications you are subscribed to and what you actually want from the reviews you read and what you put into the reviews you write yourself. And you can also share anything you agree or disagree with us about. So with that, thank you so much for listening, and join us again soon. You have been listening to Talking Images, the official podcast of icmforum.com.